I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times, and welcome to the New York Times Close-Up. This week, New York Sanitation Commissioner Jessica Tisch joins us. She'll talk about refuse and rats. But first, my New York Times colleague, Pete Wells, he announced last month that he'd be stepping down as New York Times Restaurant Critic. Stating that his reviews have had impact would be an understatement. For 12 years, his reviews have sparked conversation surrounding food quality, celebrity, influence, and restaurant criticism itself. Pete, thank you for joining us. Welcome. And we know you're going to be still writing about food for the New York Times. Why have you stopped criticism? What impact has that had on you personally?
Well, I had to realize and had to accept earlier this year that I just can't eat as much as I used to. I've turned 60 and the job is very, very physically demanding. And it's gotten more demanding every year. And at the same time, my body has gotten less,
Less resilient.
Less resilient, that's a good way of putting it. But the amount of eating never seemed, it never got less. There was always more to eat, more that I had to ask myself, do I need to eat that? Maybe I do. I think I have to eat that. And I couldn't figure out a way really to keep doing the job the way I thought it should be done and to take care of my diet. They seemed irreconcilable to me.
It seems like a dream job to be able to get paid to eat anything you want in the best places in town. What was the downside?
Well, it is work, right? So you get paid for a reason. There's a lot. There's just a lot of work, and the eating. It's not. I think you have to be open to the pleasure of food, and when you're eating something good, to really be able to respond to it. But at the same time, you just don't give yourself over to it the way you would if you were a civilian. It always has to be in the back of your mind, like, I can't finish this whole plate. It always has to be in the back of your mind, like, I'm only trying to understand this dish. I don't need to envelop it. I need to know enough about it to write about it and say something smart about it. But that doesn't mean that I have to put the whole thing inside my stomach. And there's a lot of other stuff going on at the table while you're doing this. People with you are talking to you. The waiter's coming over every 3 seconds. There's, it's a kind of complicated process. And if you're not careful, you just find yourself kind of eating kind of thoughtlessly, which is not. It's almost the opposite of what a critic should be doing. Every bite you take should be, a thoughtful, observant bite.
We all have different tastes. I mean, there's things that I won't eat or don't want to eat or just don't like to eat. So how do you decide as a critic what is good food?
Wow. That is such a good question. Partly there's, does it taste good, which sometimes is a purely personal question, right? Like I'm not crazy about raw green bell peppers, but I can appreciate how they're used in some dishes, how they can be great in a Greek salad, for example. Part of it is knowing what something is supposed to taste like or meant to taste like, or like, how does this dish traditionally done, and how close did the kitchen come to getting it right? If they deviated, did they do it on purpose, or was it a mistake? The mistakes are, you always want to figure out if somebody's being creative or sloppy. Mm-hmm. It's sometimes hard to tell the difference. There's a I'm making it sound ridiculously complicated, but there's a process of kind of understanding the dish before you can judge it.
You've written about food before. You edited food for the New York Times. You're going to write about food again. Do you have any special training to be a restaurant critic?
No, I mean, no. Just doing it over and over and over kind of helps. I think restaurant criticism is one of those fields where people really do get better as they go along. The more you've eaten, the more you know, and a lot of a lot of what you bring to tasting any dish that's put in front of you is memory. Your memory of like other versions of that same dish that you've had or similar things that you've eaten. Like what cilantro tastes like when it's really fresh, or what it tastes like when it's been in the back of the refrigerator for 2 weeks. All of these things you learn as you go along, and you bring them to your tasting and your writing.
Do you take notes when you're eating?
I used to take notes kind of under the table, and then I started taking pictures of basically everything that came out. Everything that was put in front of me, I would take a picture. Often terrible, lousy, shadowy pictures in very low light. But looking at the picture later was enough for me to reconstruct almost everything about it. What was on the plate, how it tasted, was it crunchy or soggy? All of that stuff would come back when I looked at the picture.
Are you recognized in restaurants, and how do you avoid that so it doesn't affect the way you are served or the food that you're served?
Well, you really can't avoid it completely, and it's very hard to avoid. The reality is that new restaurants, especially ones that have invested a fair amount of money and have maybe the chef has a reputation to build or to keep, and there are investors who want to be paid back. They care a lot about spotting not just critics, but other food writers and influencers and a whole cast of characters who can affect their fortunes. So they make it their job to find me, and to find other people. They're looking at every table to see, could that guy be Pete Wells? Could that guy be Pete Wells? And it's hard to hide. It's hard to hide under that kind of attention. What I have found is that after some time has gone by, a year even, sometimes even 6 months, they're not looking as intensely. They've given up hope that I'll ever come in. Or I did come in and I wrote about it, and they've forgotten about me. And often when I go to an older restaurant, I can slip in under the radar and nobody spots me because they're not looking.
And you make reservations under a different name and pay under
different names. I have about 5 credit cards with fake names that the Times gave me. I only use one of them, but I have a whole supply.
If you can remember which name you made a reservation under.
Well, see, this is, yeah. That's a tricky thing. I would tend to use the same name for a week or two and then move on to a new identity, but if I could not keep track of a different name every night.
How do you decide which restaurants to review? There's so many in the city and so many that keep opening, and before you get a chance to review them, they may close.
I know. Part of it is trying to screen them before I go, and there's a screen for does the chef or the owner have a reputation that's going to make people interested in the place? Sometimes it's, this is a cuisine we don't see every day, and this is the first Armenian restaurant in Midtown in years. That's exciting. Sometimes I'm doing it by neighborhood. Like, wouldn't it be interesting to be out in Bay Ridge? Wouldn't it be interesting? It's been a long time since I've been in the Bronx. So all of that feeds into my scouting list. And then I go out and have a meal and try to decide if the place is going to be interesting enough to write about.
What do you eat when you're not reviewing a restaurant?
Boy, well, these days, I mean, tomatoes and cucumbers, and I've made a beet soup on Sunday that I've been eating all week. I'm almost vegetarian right now as I kind of detox. Before I did that, I would generally have, very light meals throughout the day, a light breakfast, a very light lunch. Sometimes I would skip lunch if dinner was going to be very early and very large. I just kind of got to the point where I took in most of my calories at night and just ate enough in the day to keep me going.
Are there things you don't eat that you just don't like at all since you were a kid? Spinach, anything like that?
I love spinach. I think spinach is great. There are certain preparations that I don't really need to see. I mean, my mother used to steam zucchini, which I don't think does it any favors, and I've got to admit, I don't love meatloaf the way a lot of people seem to love it.
I love meatloaf.
Yeah, I understand. I mean,
Comfort food.
Yeah, I get it. It's just not. It's just it doesn't ring my bells. But I can still, like feel it when a meatloaf is well done or decently done.
Do you get feedback from your reviews? Do you ever hear from the chefs or the restaurant owners or from readers saying, boy, I agree with you, or what do you mean I had a great meal there? Or,
yeah, well, the readers will go into the comments on the review and mouth off. Very often, I'm reviewing restaurants pretty early in their life, so I won't do a place until it's 2 months old. But after that, it's fair game. And in the first 2 months, not that many readers have had a chance to get there. So often they're kind of responding to what they think the food sounds like. But an older restaurant like a Peter Luger or a Danielle, a lot of readers have had a chance to go to those places, and then they will respond from their own experience, and that's always to me more interesting to hear than somebody's perception of what they think I'm describing.
Any advice to your successor?
Pace yourself. Just pace yourself, because it is a marathon. It's like a weird marathon that it's almost you run it in reverse. You get in worse and worse shape as you go along.
Any thing you wish you hadn't written?
Nothing I wish I hadn't written, except maybe some reviews that I and everybody else have forgotten because the restaurants weren't really interesting enough. I did, I think in the beginning, have a feeling that there were places that you just sort of should review because they were there and everyone was talking about them. But it's hard to write a good review if you don't have a strong opinion.
Pete Wells, retiring restaurant critic for the New York Times, but he'll remain a food writer for the Times. Coming up next, New York City Sanitation Commissioner Jessica Tisch. Our next guest has been praised by Mayor Adams as a Get Stuff Done official. Before Jessica Tisch was selected as New York City Sanitation Commissioner, she helped transform technology and operations at the New York Police Department. Welcome and thank you for joining us. Big news coming up, big innovation in garbage collection in New York City. Containers. What are they going to do for making the city cleaner?
Every day in New York City, we leave 44 million pounds of trash bags right on our curbs. They attract rats, they create odors, they're disgusting to walk past. And we looked around the world, other cities don't live that way. They have for decades been putting their trash in containers, whether they be little wheelie bins or larger on-street containers. And so Mayor Adams has tasked us at the Department of Sanitation with getting all of our trash off of the streets and into containers, and we are well on our way in that effort.
How is that going to work? We've used these awful bags, these smelly bags piled up on the street, which look worse, of course, when there's a strike by garbage workers, but they look worse all the time. Where are the containers going to go? What are they going to replace? Who is going to be required to use them?
So it's not a one-size-fits-all model. We'll look at it in different chunks. Let's start with the businesses in New York City. 20 million pounds of trash a day. So that's 50% of the trash in New York City comes from businesses. They are all now required to put their trash out in wheelie bins. They've been required to do so for several months. We're seeing wonderful compliance. We're still enforcing, but seeing really good compliance.
And where do they put them, on the
And
curb?
so they just set them out on the curb when after the trash has been collected. When they open the next morning, they bring them back in. They can store them outdoors, they can store them indoors. We've been really flexible, but half of the trash, the business trash, goes in the wheelie bins. We just announced that the same model is going to be used for low density residences. So everything from the single family home to the 9-unit brownstone. Come November 12th, they will be required to put their trash in wheelie bins as well. We at the Department of Sanitation have produced a standardized New York City bin that is for sale now. It is both high quality, it is durable, it is rat resistant, and it is also offered at significantly below market rates. And then for the higher density buildings, the buildings that are 30 units and up, we're going to be doing what you've seen in other large, maybe European cities like Barcelona. We're going to put large on-street containers in the parking lane. Those on-street containers are hoisted by a special truck, which we've developed, and that will start in West Harlem next spring, so this coming May.
What is it going to do for parking spaces, for one thing?
So we're doing the environmental review on it now, but it will by no means obliterate parking in New York City. We're thinking that perhaps it's going to be in the area of a 2% haircut to parking, but certainly not the cut to parking that many people feared, that caused the city not to make any progress in containerizing the trash for all of these decades.
Although I guess in Manhattan it'll probably have a larger effect, and also with outdoor restaurants and bike lanes and bus lanes and everything else, that will cause more of a problem for people who drive. Curbside
Space is the most valuable space, real estate in the city, and so you have to be very careful and thoughtful. You got to balance different equities about how you use that space for. In my opinion, the cut that it will require in parking is definitely small enough to justify the enormous benefit that we will get from getting rid of those mountains of trash. And I just want to add, New York City is not going to be the first city in the world to containerize its trash. In fact, we are going to be the last. We should not be living this way. And Mayor Adams is determined to change the paradigm for trash in New York.
What took us so long?
You know, I am a person who doesn't believe in the status quo just because it is the status quo. In fact, I think the greatest joy that...
Which is why you did such a great job with the police department.
Thank you. I was going to say the greatest joy that I have gotten from my work in government is the opportunity to look at big problems that have vexed the city for a long time and figure out how we can do better. And trash, you know, the big mountains of garbage bags, it's like kind of the perfect example of that type of problem for me.
We did a great series, I should not say, in the New York Times, nytimes.com, on garbage in the city, why it's been such an intractable problem, why it is different here from other cities. One of the things is we did not design the Manhattan grid system with alleys. Another is that many cities do not collect garbage from businesses, from multiple dwellings. Why do we? Why do we not just limit it to private residences?
So in New York City, the Department of Sanitation collects residential trash and trash from institutions like schools, for example. There is a whole separate network of private carters in New York City that collect the business trash. What the Department of Sanitation is doing for the first time is we're saying we want to regulate, we want to change the way all the trash, whether it's trash we collect or trash a private carter collects, how it's managed before it is collected, when it is out on our curbs. And the whole point in this effort is really to restore dignity to every street, every neighborhood, every borough of the city.
What is acceptably clean? How do we define that?
You know, it's a good question. It's easier to define what is not acceptably clean, and certainly what is not acceptably clean is a status quo where we just every day, used to be 4 o'clock, dump all of our trash out on the sidewalks. Yes, litter in New York City is a big problem. But I submit the bigger problem is the fact that historically 44 million pounds of trash bags have sat out on our curbs for 12 hours a day.
And does that attract rats, presumably?
Of course, it attracts rats. And I'll tell you a great statistic. We are piloting this high density on-street containerization that we're going to be rolling out next May. But we're piloting it in Hamilton Heights on 10 residential blocks. And in the first several months of that pilot, we saw rat complaints on those blocks go down 68%. We know that a third of the material in those black bags is food waste, and human food is rat food. The best rat mitigation strategy that we have in New York City or in any city is denying the rats the food source. And we are seeing that play out on the streets of Hamilton Heights, which is why we're going to blow that out through all of West Harlem come May.
Are New Yorkers dirtier than other city residents?
No, I don't think so, although I think a lot is cultural. You know, I was just recently in Japan. You walk on the streets of Japan, there is no litter. There are no litter baskets.
What do people do?
There is no walking trash.
Probably
So
no gum on the streets.
It is
either.
unusual. In Japan, you don't see people, in Tokyo, for example, walking with a Dunkin' Donuts cup. It's just culturally very different. So I think there are sociologically, there are a lot of differences city to city, and trash happens to be among them.
What should the average person do to help reduce litter?
Well, obviously, don't litter. That's a start. But I think in New York City, we haven't historically taken our sanitation rules seriously. So we have very basic rules for property owners around cleanliness. Keeping the sidewalk clean and 18 inches into the street, how we set out the trash, nothing earth-shattering, very basic. But for too long, those rules weren't prioritized and they weren't really enforced in a meaningful way. And in addition to containerizing the trash, one of the key things that we are doing is enforcing these very basic rules. Our cleanliness summonses were up 60% last year, and they're up again this year. And I just believe that if we hold New Yorkers to the very clear, very basic standards we have around cleanliness, and we change the way we set out our trash, we will see, and in fact, I submit we are seeing big changes in the way that the streets look.
The summonses issued are up. How many of them actually get properly adjudicated, enforced?
You know, when you get a summons, the Department of Sanitation doesn't adjudicate it. There's a separate agency that runs trials called Oath. So I don't have those percentages, but I just want to say that we don't believe in enforcement for the sake of enforcement. I believe, however, very strongly in enforcement for the sake of holding people to the very basic rules that we have in New York City around cleanliness. And amazingly, I found over the past 2 years that cleanliness, it's just one thing that everyone agrees on. Everyone wants a cleaner city. And we have to remember the Department of Sanitation is 10,000 people. We clean the road beds and we pick up 24 million pounds of trash a day. But property owners have a very key part to play in the effort to keep the city clean.
You're a glutton for punishment because you also took over the responsibility for highway trash and for graffiti. How has that worked out?
I think it's working out really well. During the pandemic, oh boy, the highways looked really, really filthy. And so I really wanted to take over the cleaning of the highways. There is no one better at cleaning than the men and women of the Department of Sanitation. And we formed a highway unit, and they've done really a great job working through all of the highways. Now each highway is on a regular maintenance schedule, and they really do look much better than they looked during the pandemic. On graffiti, all of our work, or most of our work, is 311 based. So when property owners call 311 because they have graffiti on their building, the city's supposed to send someone to go clean it up. And we've gotten through an enormous backlog and are now current. So if you have graffiti on your property and you want us to come clean it, just call 311.
You mastered technology in the police department. Is technology playing a role in the sanitation department too?
Huge. Unbelievable. The New York City Department of Sanitation is much more tech forward than anyone would imagine. And we didn't really have to imagine the other week when there was the CrowdStrike outage, because for a day we weren't able to use the technology, and it sort of blew our minds. But everything, our routes, how much we collect, our assignments, it's all tech-based. And in a snowstorm, wow, is the technology useful. We have GPS on every truck in the city. We can see which streets have been salted, which streets have been plowed, how long since they were last plowed, how many passes have we taken on them. So tech has really changed the game in sanitation as well.
Thank you, and we'll invite you back for an update on the containers. Sanitation Commissioner Jessica Tisch, thanks for joining us. And coming up next, my thoughts on the mayoral race. Mayor Adams notched another minor victory this week in his race toward re-election. A third challenger, Comptroller Brad Lander, declared his candidacy in next year's Democratic mayoral primary. The more rivals who smell blood, the more likely they will split the opposition and that Adams will be renominated. The primary is 10 months away, of course, and variables like ranked choice voting can skew all the predictions. Who knows the impact of the presidential election, world events, crime rates, even bird flu? But there's one factor that's been pretty constant in New York City mayoral campaigns. No matter how unpopular the mayor, incumbents almost never lose. The last one who did was David Dinkins to Rudy Giuliani in 1993. The last Democrat who was defeated for renomination after one term was Abe Beame. He lost to Ed Koch in 1977. That election was transformed into a referendum on Beame's leadership during the fiscal crisis. John Lindsay lost the Republican nomination for re-election in 1969, but he turned his re-election campaign into a referendum on the Vietnam War. He won a second term as a Liberal Party candidate and independent. Before that, you'd have to go back to 1925, when Jimmy Walker upset John Hyland, and to 1917, when Mayor John Poroy Mitchell lost the 1917 Republican primary and the general election as an independent. In other words, don't be too quick to count Mayor Adams out. Just saying. For the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sam Roberts.